All right, my friends, we're going to jump back to the Revolutionary War for just a minute. After the Revolutionary War, America's founding fathers helped write this very important document called the Constitution. The Constitution is the framework of the American government that lays out how our government will be set up and how it will work. Our founding fathers are the men that helped write the Constitution, men like George Washington and James Madison. Remember, James Madison was the 4th president of the United States. He is known as the father of the Constitution because he's the one that took everyone's ideas and put them together into one paper. We learned in our last lesson, we finished filling out all of our causes of the War of 1812. Remember, the British and French were blockading U.S. ports. The British were impressing soldiers, seizing ships and stealing cargo. They broke the treaty that they had signed with George Washington, our first president. They attacked a U.S. ship called the Chesapeake, and they were arming Native Americans that were fighting against American settlers moving west. As the 4th president of the United States, there was a lot of pressure on James Madison. Remember, the United States was on the brink of war, was on the brink of joining the War of 1812. The previous 3 presidents, George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, had all tried to establish a good relationship with Great Britain. But it wasn't always successful, as we saw with our treaty that Great Britain broke. When war broke out between the United States' 2 most important trading partners, it became even more difficult to avoid a conflict. We're going to jump back in to a story about the War of 1812. From this point on, all of the stories about the War of 1812 will be told from the point of view of a narrator called Grandfather Lafitte. It will all be told from his point of view in stories that he is telling to his grandchildren. Let's start with our first story, told by Grandfather Lafitte. Topics. Topics are the main subjects of a discussion, paper, or project. The teacher explained that the read-aloud topics were seasons and weather and astronomy. Govern. Govern means to rule over or be responsible for making decisions for a nation. As the first president of the United States, George Washington was chosen to help govern the nation. Citizens. Citizens are people who belong to a country, either because they were born there or because they were declared members of that country by law, and who are given certain rights by that country. Joey's aunt and uncle became citizens of the United States. Looming. Looming means threatening to happen or hinting that something bad or negative is going to happen. The dark clouds meant that a thunderstorm was looming. Magnificent describes something that is great, beautiful, or impressive. The sky was a magnificent shade of pink just before sunset. I'm going to read several different sentences. If the sentence I read is an example of something that could be described as magnificent, I want you to say, "That is magnificent." If the sentence I read is not an example of something that could be described as magnificent, say, "That is not magnificent." All right, our first one. The chocolate chip cookies from the new bakery were the best I ever had. It sounds like those cookies were pretty magnificent. The sky was full of dark clouds, so we knew a storm was looming. That one doesn't sound as magnificent, huh? The princess wore a crown that was covered with glittering jewels. I'd say that crown is pretty magnificent. Colin sharpened his pencil at the pencil sharpener. That's not too magnificent, that's just an ordinary everyday thing. He came home from school with a stomach ache. I think stomach aches are not very magnificent. And our last one, you could see the entire skyline of the city from the top of the skyscraper. That sounds like a pretty magnificent view to me. It was a beautiful spring day in central Virginia. 10-year-old JP and his younger sister, Adele, raced from their home through the pasture, or field, that led to their grandfather's farmhouse. Though originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, their grandfather Lafitte now lived on a neighboring horse farm. Grandfather Lafitte loved to tell the children stories. Today he had promised to tell them about the War of 1812. JP was learning about this war in school, and of course, Adele wanted to know everything about anything that her brother was doing. Before he retired, their grandfather had been a history professor. A professor is someone who teaches college students. He declared that he was an expert on the subject. Grandfather Lafitte was waiting for the children on the front porch. As JP and Adele settled into the chairs at the table across from their grandfather, Adele noticed that he was holding an old, leather-bound journal. "What do you have there?" asked Adele inquisitively. She had just turned 8, and JP said she was always full of questions. "Oh, this journal belonged to your great-great-great-great-grandfather. He fought in the War of 1812. I'll tell you more about him later," Grandfather Lafitte explained. "Now, where should I begin?" he asked eagerly. "I have a list of topics that I need to learn about," started JP. "He has to know about President James Madison and his wife, Dolly," Adele interrupted excitedly. "Yes," said JP, finishing what he was saying. "I have to know about the beginning of the war, the USS Constitution, the attacks on Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Andrew Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans, and how the war ended." "Well, that's quite a list," exclaimed Grandfather Lafitte. "We'd better get started then. It sounds like you do not need to know anything about pirates," he added with a curious tone. "Pirates?" gasped JP. "Were there pirates in the War of 1812? "We shall see," chuckled Grandfather Lafitte. "I think I will start at the beginning and tell you about the man who was president when the war began. Who was the 4th president of the United States? Who was the president when the war started?" "James Madison," said Adele proudly. She had recently attended a school field trip to Montpelier because it was close to their home. She learned a lot about James Madison there. Grandfather began. James Madison was born on March 16, 1751. He grew up on a large plantation in central Virginia, not far from where we are right now. A plantation is a very large farm. His family home was called Montpelier. As a young boy, Jemmy, as his father called him, was homeschooled or taught at home. It's been said that he read every book that his father had in his library. And Mr. Madison had a lot of books. When he was 17, James went to the College of New Jersey, which is now called Princeton University. Just as he did when he was young, James Madison loved to read. He enjoyed learning Latin and Greek and debating in college. Debating means discussing something with someone whose opinion might be different than your own, similar to what you will do when you present your persuasive speech. James actually graduated from college in only 2 years. Today, it usually takes twice that long, 4 years, to finish college. I like learning Spanish in school, Adele added enthusiastically. I'm glad that you do, replied Grandfather Lafitte, smiling at his granddaughter. He continued, as a young man, James Madison did not like the way the colonies were run by Britain. He thought the colonists should be able to govern themselves, or be responsible for making their own decisions. In 1774, when he was just 23 years old, James Madison became a leader in the House of Burgesses. The House of Burgesses was the first form of government in colonial America. The next year, the colonies were at war with Great Britain. This war, the Revolutionary War, lasted until 1783. Americans won their freedom, and they became citizens of a new nation, the United States of America. Didn't James Madison write the Constitution? Asked JP. You're right, replied Grandfather. After the war, he continued to be involved in governing Virginia. He is perhaps most famous for his role in helping to write the Constitution, though. James Madison was the only one who had the idea to use each state's population as a way of deciding how many elected representatives it should have in Congress. Today, there are 2 elected senators for each state. The number of representatives for each state depends on how many people live in that state. He was also responsible for organizing the government into 3 branches with different powers. Branches can mean limbs on a tree, but here it means 3 different sections. In fact, much of the Constitution was written by James Madison, but he did get some help from George Washington and many other founding fathers. James Madison also helped to write another part of the Constitution called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights protects American people and their property. What are you going to tell us about Dolly Madison? Asked Adele. Mama says that she was a really interesting lady. Yes, she was, replied Grandfather Lafitte. That's coming next, don't you worry. People who knew him said that James Madison was a shy and serious man. He also had some health problems. His poor health and his involvement in politics, he was a very busy man, meant that he did not spend much time socializing. Socializing means talking to and doing things with other people in a friendly way. However, in 1791, when he was 42, James Madison met a young woman named Dolly Payne Todd. Dolly Todd was 25 when she met James Madison. She previously had been married to another man named John Todd. She and her husband, John, had 2 sons, John Payne and William. Sadly, Dolly's first husband and her youngest son, William, both died from yellow fever. Dolly, who was known to be very cheerful and outgoing, turned to her friends and family for support. Her friends introduced her to James Madison. When they met, James Madison was a member of the House of Representatives. They liked each other and began to spend more and more time together. They got married in September 1794. Where did they live after they got married? Asked Adele. Well, at first, they lived in James Madison's family home, Montpelier, not too far from here. However, in 1801, when his close friend Thomas Jefferson became president, the Madisons moved to the new capital. Washington, D.C., exclaimed Adele. Exactly, replied Grandfather Lafitte. James Madison became Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. That meant that he was responsible for dealing with other countries on behalf of the United States. Almost immediately, he had problems with Great Britain and France. "What kind of problems, grandfather?" asked Adele. "Both countries were interfering with U.S. merchant ships," said grandfather. "Why were they doing that?" asked JP, who by now had finished his entire ham sandwich. You see, a series of wars had broken out in Europe. These wars were named after the man who started them, the well-known French military leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon wanted France to become the most powerful nation in the world, but Great Britain and other European nations wanted to stop him. Britain had one problem, though. Although it had a very powerful navy, it did not have enough sailors. To get more sailors, they captured men and forced them to join their navy. In the beginning, they only captured men in their own country, but as the Napoleonic Wars continued, they began to stop American ships and capture members of their crew too. What was the practice of capturing men and forcing them to serve in the Navy called? It was called impressment. "That must not have made James Madison very happy," said Adele. "It didn't, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't convince the British to stop." After being president for 2 terms, Thomas Jefferson suggested that his friend James Madison run for president. In March 1809, James Madison became the 4th president of the United States. "And Dolly Madison became the First Lady?" quizzed Adele. "She did indeed," replied Grandfather Lafitte. Dolly Madison was actually the first First Lady. The term First Lady refers to the wife of the U.S. President. While Dolly Madison wasn't the first wife of a U.S. President, she set the standard for the role as official hostess of the country. And she was an excellent hostess. She had magnificent parties. She was known for her love of fashion and had quite a few fine dresses. She even helped to design the interior, or inside, of the new president's house, which we now know as the White House. The president's house became known as the White House when President Theodore Roosevelt referred to it as that more than 100 years later. By the time James Madison came into office, war was looming. Many members of Congress were urging him to declare war on Great Britain. They thought the British had been arming Native Americans and were encouraging them to fight American settlers moving west. James Madison felt that he had no other option but to lead his nation into war. On June 18, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. In our read aloud, we heard the phrase branches of our government. The U.S. government has 3 branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Branches can also mean limbs on a tree, like in picture number 2. Branches can also be different sections or locations of one thing. In number 3, we are seeing a branch of a bank. Branches, in number 4, we can see the Mississippi River. Branching off of the Mississippi River are the Missouri, Arkansas, Illinois, Ohio, and Tennessee rivers. In this case, to branch off means to come off of and move away from. Okay, so James Madison had a very important job in 1812. What was that very important job that he had? You've got it. He was the President of the United States. I'd say that's a pretty important job. What events in Mr. Madison's life prior to becoming the 4th president prepared him to be president?
there were a lot of things that we learned about. He was a government leader in the House of Burgesses in Virginia. He played an important role in writing the Constitution. He was a Secretary of State. And as the Secretary of State, he worked with the British to try to stop them from the practicing impressment. So there was a lot of things that he did in his life that later helped him when he became president. What role did Dolly Madison play in the United States in 1812? Right. Miss Dolly Madison was James Madison's wife, and she was the First Lady of the United States. As First Lady, she served as the hostess of the White House, and she helped design the interior of the White House. How did Dolly Madison's early life and personality help her to be the First Lady of the United States? Dolly Madison was a very cheerful, friendly, and happy, outgoing person, which helped her get along with all of the people that she had to play hostess for in the White House. She was an excellent hostess. Why do you think James Madison was not eager to go to war? Why do you think he didn't want to go to war? There are a lot of things you could have said on that one. It's just what you think. Some of the reasons that I think might have led to him not wanting to go to war were that the United States was a brand new nation, and we didn't have a very large army or navy. We also didn't have a lot of money at the time. We had spent a lot of money on the Revolutionary War, and did not have a lot to spend on more soldiers and weapons. He also, I think, was worried that the United States might not win, which would really hurt us as a new nation. All right, my friends, we are going to do a couple more things today. I've got one more thing I want to talk to you about, and then we've got an assignment to do for today too. Okay, we're going to talk about two different suffixes. A suffix is something that is added to the end of a word to give it a new meaning. The two suffixes that we are going to talk about today are full and less. The suffix full tells us that the word might mean full of something. The suffix less tells us that the word might mean without or not having something. In our read aloud today, we heard the sentence, Dolly was known to be very cheerful and outgoing. We can split the word cheerful into two parts, cheer and full. Cheer by itself means joy or happiness. The suffix full means full of. When these are combined, they become the word cheerful, which means full of happiness or joy. The suffix less means without. Listen for the suffix less in this sentence. My mother decided to paint the dark and cheerless room a brighter color. What do you think cheerless means in this sentence? Right, cheerless means without cheer. If cheerless means without cheer, and cheerful means full of cheer, those words are antonyms. Remember, antonyms mean opposite. Let's try with the word breathless. What do you think breathless means? Out of breath. Let's try power. If we add the suffix full to the end of power, what does that mean? Right, it means full of power. But what if we add less? It becomes powerless. What does powerless mean? Without power. Those words are opposites. Fearful means full of fear, and fearless means without fear. Colorful means full of color, and colorless means without color. Harmful means full of harm, and harmless means without harm. All of those words are opposites or antonyms of each other. In our last lesson, we created a list of reasons why the war hawks wanted to go to war, and a list of reasons why the merchants did not want to go to war. The first page of our assignment today is a list that I created with a couple extra reasons in each column that I've added. We are going to use these columns today to write our speech to Mr. Madison. You may use this one that I've included with the assignment, or if you have the one you made yesterday, you can use that one as well. You can use any reasons from this list that you would like, or any other reasons that you remember from our read aloud, why the Warhawks wanted to go to war, or why the merchants did not. The very first thing we need to do today, that you need to do, is pick which one you think you would be if you had lived in America in 1812. Would you have been a war hawk who wanted to fight, or would you have been a merchant who wanted peace? When you have decided which stance or opinion you want to take, go ahead and scroll down to the second part of the assignment. On that second part, there is a form to help you write your speech with all of the different sections of the speech. The very first one is our opening or introduction. In this section, we are introducing ourselves to our audience. Remember, our audience for this speech is President James Madison. I'm going to address my speech to Mr. Madison. I want to introduce myself to Mr. Madison. I need to tell him whether I am a merchant or a war hawk. I am a war hawk. Our second section is your opinion or position. You're going to tell them what you think about going to war. If I am a war hawk, I think that we should declare war on Great Britain. If you're a merchant, you will write that you think that we should avoid war with Great Britain. Our next two sections, we are going to use our reasons from our list. If I am a war hawk, should I use reasons that the merchants did not want to go to war? No, that wouldn't make very much sense. If I am a war hawk, I need to select reasons that the war hawks did want to go to war. There are two different sections for reasons. So I have said, Mr. Madison, I am a war hawk. I think that we should declare war on Great Britain because, let's see, what reason do I want to use first? I want to say that we would gain more land. Because winning the war would allow the U.S. to gain land from Great Britain and increase its size. Also, what's another reason I should pick for my also? I'm going to say that winning the war would prove that America was strong.
I'm going to include reasons here, 2 reasons here. I'm going to say also Great Britain is weakened by its conflict. Conflict means fighting with France, and would be easy to defeat, proving America's strength. Your closing statement or your conclusion should restate your position and wrap up your speech. A good way to wrap up your speech and to restate your opinion is to write in conclusion. Conclusion means an ending or a wrap-up. In conclusion, the nation should go to war to increase its size and prove its strength. I've restated some of the things that I said earlier in my speech. I am restating those and restating my position that we should go to war. Yours will obviously look different than mine. You might choose to be a merchant, and if you are a war hawk, you may choose to use different reasons than the ones I did on my speech. When you are done with your speech, that's all you need to do for today. When you are done, go ahead and submit it with the turn in button at the top.